Welcome to the Reality Taboo, where no topic is off limits. It's December 20th, 2025. Turning Point USA blinked. And the organization didn't just blink. They kept their eyes closed, put their hands over their head, and ducked for cover ahead of the much anticipated and hyped alleged debunking of the narrative skeptical questions, or conspiracies if you prefer, surrounding the Charlie Kirk killing on September 10th. Turning Point USA, through Erika Kirk, the CEO and widow of Charlie Kirk, audibled to, instead of allowing that debunking to proceed as proclaimed and as scheduled, with Candace Owens being boxed into a corner where it looked like she was ducking, or at least that's the way it was going to be portrayed by Turning Point USA. Instead, that was called off, and Erika Kirk met with Candace Owens, and Candace Owens said that she wanted that meeting to be public, but that Erika Kirk preferred for it to be private. And so the meeting that lasted almost 5 hours took place in private, and simultaneous to the meeting between Owens and Kirk, TPUSA did do the normal Charlie Kirk live stream show, but instead of debunking the various alleged baseless conspiracies that Candace Owens had put forward, as Blake Neff had said was going to occur not more than a week prior, said was going to occur absolutely irrespective of whether or not Candace Owens showed up or not. Instead, he was on with someone else, where they brought up the potential that, in fact, Tyler Robinson, while he was the killer, did not act alone. And so without proceeding any further, just what we've covered so far indicates a massive about face in the way that TPUSA is orienting itself towards this controversy, that while they have hoped that it would simply dissipate on its own rather than being able to dismiss it, as in fact continued to grow into a crescendo of criticism among the populist MAGA base, among the very grassroots people that are the bread and butter of Turning Point USA's operations. And since that meeting on Monday, Erika Kirk has not said anything other than promoting AmFest, which we'll get to in short order, which is one of the largest events that Turning Point USA does each year, where they bring prominent speakers on the right from culture and politics, social media, academia, to the extent that there is any right representation there. But AmFest just started this weekend, and so for the intervening 3, almost 4 days, Erika Kirk had not said anything in response to Candace Owens, who spent a lot of time talking about what transpired in the meeting between Candace Owens and Erika Kirk. And so what we'll be talking about now is the recounting of that meeting as Owens reports it, given that there has not been any pushback, not just from Erika Kirk, but from anyone else in Turning Point USA disputing anything that she said in the intervening 3 days with regards to what transpired at the meeting. And the biggest 3 headlines from that meeting, as Candace Owens has reported it, is that Erika Kirk lied, Blake Neff lied, and Tyler Boyer lied. And if lied feels like too loaded a verb to use, then maybe more magnanimously, Erika Kirk misspoke or misremembered, and so did Blake Neff, and so did Tyler Boyer. As I'll get to, though, I think, especially in the case of Erika Kirk and Tyler Boyer, there is really no conceivable way that these were honest mistakes or innocent derelictions of duty. Blake Neff's lie was that immediately following the shooting at the UVU campus, that Mikey McCoy, who is the son of Rob McCoy, who is the Turning Point Faith point man, Blake Neff said immediately following the chaos of the shooting that Mikey McCoy was, as he was struggling to maintain his composure, said that he needed to call Erika Kirk immediately, and that was the first call that he made. Well, Candace Owens asked for call logs and was provided them during this private meeting with Erika Kirk, and from that meeting found that that was not the first call that Mikey McCoy made, even though he said he was going to make it as the first call, but instead he called his wife. And so, okay, it was in the melee, the fog of war, and maybe Neff misremembered, or maybe Mikey McCoy said he was going to immediately call Erika Kirk, which presumably somebody's going to have to call Erika Kirk from Turning Point USA. So if you're talking to someone else who's like the number 2 at Turning Point USA who might otherwise call Erika Kirk immediately, saying you're going to call Erika Kirk and then not immediately doing so, doesn't demonstrate the greatest presence of mind, but standing on its own in isolation from all of the other events surrounding the killing and what has followed since. There's nothing particularly compelling here other than it was Neff who has talked about this multiple times, simply recounting something that wasn't accurate. More indicting is Erika Kirk, who, yes, is putative grieving widow, but is also the CEO of Turning Point USA, a position that she has chosen to fill, even though it would, of course, be understandable broadly by the public and by Turning Point USA stakeholders for her to decline to be the titular head of the organization in the aftermath of her husband's killing, even if the contingency plan or the succession plan had her at the top, or that the board voted that she would be the best person to lead. If everything is on the up and up and she is not in a position of danger, which is something that I have had a niggling suspicion could very much be the case, and that is why she is doing this. Not necessarily because she is directly implicated, but because she is threatened, given the position that she holds and that her husband and the father of her children were just killed, that she could be being used in that way as a weapon of the Turning Point USA donor class and the MAGA apparatus surrounding it that wants very much to push Turning Point USA in a pro-Zionist MAGA direction, that having Erika Kirk at the head as the successor and the new CEO of Turning Point USA inherently deflects a lot of the criticism about what Turning Point USA is doing vis-a-vis Charlie Kirk's legacy, because the insinuation that Turning Point USA is on a trajectory that goes against everything that Charlie Kirk believed, or at least goes against the direction that Charlie Kirk was turning in. Well, if you have Erika Kirk as the CEO, if you have the late Charlie Kirk, the late founder of Turning Point USA, if his wife is in charge, it's sort of hard to criticize the direction that she's taking things as saying that they go in diametric opposition to what Charlie Kirk wanted. And so there is a very compelling reason that the MAGA TPUSA donor class would want Erika Kirk at the top. I wouldn't dismiss out of hand entirely that she was somehow implicated. I wouldn't dismiss anything out of hand, frankly, at this point. Watching her, she very much does invoke a feeling of watching someone who is an actress, someone who is delivering lines. She does not come across as particularly authentic. Could in some way be attributed to her playing her role that she was cast in as the new head of Turning Point USA, but it also could be, and I think more likely is, a consequence of her not being in a position emotionally and psychologically and possibly even aptitudinally. It's not like being CEO is an easy thing that anyone can do, and maybe she just lacks the chops to do it. But it could also be for, again, emotional and psychological reasons, that at this point the only way she can really operate when she faces publicly is by following a script, because if she tries to do it authentically or organically, she will break down, or she'll lose her train of thought, or she'll say something that she doesn't want to say. And so from the outside looking in, there is some sympathy that is elicited there. And hopefully, if she is in the position of the Emperor's sister in Gladiator, who is playing a role she doesn't want to play in an effort to protect her children, well, I hope that comes out at some point. But for the time being, in her capacity as the CEO of Turning Point USA, the false claim that she made publicly, that there was no basis at all to the assertion that Candace Owens had made, that Charlie Kirk had told other people that he feared for his life, that they were going to kill him 24 hours, less than 24 hours before he was killed. She said that there was no basis for that at all. But in the meeting, she walked that back and said, instead, her explanation was that she had looked through his text messages on his iPhone and hadn't seen him texting anyone that. But of course, Charlie Kirk isn't going to be sending iPhone messages via text, especially sensitive or explosive claims via text. He's going to be doing that sort of thing through encrypted private messaging apps like Signal or Telegram, not just via text. And in fact, that was Erika Kirk's explanation, that she hadn't looked at anything other than just his text, which, if this assertion she had made came just days after the event happened, would be one thing. But Candace Owens has been talking about this for almost 3 months, and it's been denied all the way up until last week, when Erika Kirk, who said she's been in possession of Charlie Kirk's phone for months and has looked through it, claimed definitively that there was nothing like that in there. And so it just belies belief that she could have not noticed that, and not only her, but no one else involved in Turning Point USA, let alone authorities who are investigating a murder. I know it has been heavily intimated that this is a single shooter, lone shooter, case closed. Just be patient and all of the evidence will become obvious and will fall into place, and it'll be a slam dunk case, and so we don't really need to look at anything else. I know that is what has been presented by the Fed narrative lone shooter story, but in any murder investigation that is seriously conducted, the communications of the victim are relevant potential evidence in the case. And so for investigators to have looked through his phone and also not seen any of this, or if they did see it, Erika Kirk didn't ask about it, it wasn't communicated to her, with the backdrop of Turning Point USA being under pressure from one of the largest independent media platforms on the planet through Candace Owens, and 3 months to prepare to address the claims that she is making, for Erika Kirk to have proclaimed that there was nothing to what Candace Owens was saying and that she was lying, even though the evidence was right there. She just looked at one of the private messaging apps that Charlie Kirk was using. There just really is no reasonable way to assess that as anything other than an intentional and premeditated lie. And yet even Erika Kirk's lie was not the most devastating fabrication revealed from the private meeting. That honor goes Andrew Colvett, and I think earlier I had said Tyler Boyer was one of the 3 that were caught in a lie from the Owens-Kirk meeting. That was a misspeaking on my part. It was Blake Neff, Erika Kirk, and Andrew Colvett. Colvett, who is Turning Point USA's head of public relations, wrote a little more than a week after Kirk's assassination, quote, "I want to address some of the discussion about the lack of an exit wound with Charlie. I'm usually not interested in delving into most of this kind of online chatter, and I apologize this is somewhat graphic, but in this case, the fact that there wasn't an exit wound is probably another miracle, and I want people to know. I just spoke with the surgeon who worked on Charlie in the hospital. He said the bullet absolutely should have gone through, which is very, very normal for a high-powered, high-velocity round. I've seen wounds from this caliber many times, and they always just go through everything. This would have taken a moose or 2 down, an elk, etc. But it didn't go through. Charlie's body stopped it. I mentioned to his doctor that there were dozens of staff, students, and special guests standing directly behind Charlie on the other side of the tent, and he replied, it was an absolute miracle that someone else didn't get killed. His bone was so healthy, and the density was so impressive that he's like the man of steel. It should have just gone through and through. It likely would have killed those standing behind him, too." Unquote. According to Candace Owens, that wasn't what happened. The surgeon said nothing of the sort and is instead upset about having a long quote attributed to him that he never made. As of now, the surgeon in question hasn't made any public statements, so far as I am aware, and probably not something a private individual wants to be caught up in. But if, as reported subsequent to this private meeting, the surgeon never said anything of the sort and Colvett just spun that out of whole cloth for whatever reason, I suspect at some point that will be publicly acknowledged by the surgeon. And of course, this is the strongest single piece of evidence that calls into question the veracity of the official story that there was a lone shooter shooting a high-powered rifle with a .30-06 piece of ammunition that, as Colvett also reported, he said that the coroner of Charlie Kirk found the bullet allegedly just beneath Charlie Kirk's skin. Not even that it was lodged into his spine or that it had somehow spine had stopped and it ricocheted down and got caught up in his vertebrae, but that it was just beneath the skin. And so if we are to put any credence to that, it's not just that Charlie Kirk drank a lot of milk and had bones of calcified steel, but that his skin, in fact, was capable of stopping a high-powered round that regularly travels through the thickest, sinewiest innards of big game like elk and deer and moose. Andrew Colvett, who's posted on Twitter on X about 30 times over the last 3 days, has said nothing at all one way or the other. In fact, the only thing that he has put up on his X timeline regarding the meeting between Erika, Kirk, and Candace Owens is retweeting when Erika Kirk put out at the conclusion of the meeting, quote, "Had a very productive conversation with Candace Owens. More to come from both of us. Looking forward to AmFest this week. Time to get back to work," unquote. And it's not just that the surgeon said nothing, but instead that the piece of ammunition was one that disintegrated upon entry, which, and I'm way out of my depth here, is the sort of round that is often used in training purposes for target practice and those sorts of things because of its attributes, design attributes that have it dissipate within the target after making contact. So sort of like grape shot, but not grape shot until it hits its target, and then it breaks into a bunch of pieces so that it won't go in other places, so that it won't ricochet off a target or go through a target and cause additional damage. And that seems to mesh with the idea that there was no exit wound, but of course it raises a bunch of questions about why a somewhat obscure type of ammunition that is less lethal would be used in an assassination attempt and why that wouldn't have been reported on previously. So clearly the potential Turning Point USA leading Candace Owens into a trap, that narrative has evaporated entirely this week. It's looking to me like the anti-Semitic right, and I use that as a neutral descriptor. I don't mean it as a pejorative, nor do I mean it as something laudable, but I just mean it as a way to understand an element of the right that is inherently skeptical of not just the state of Israel, but is aware of and contends with the Jewish question and what that means for culture and politics in the West and the future of Heritage America. And that anti-Semitic right, of which Nick Fuentes is the most prominent, that contingent of the right's concerns about this being a clown show that is going to strengthen MAGA by discrediting MAGA skepticism about Israel and even any broaching of the Jewish question, that by putting forward a clown like Candace Owens and having her humiliate herself and be a sort of Pied Piper who leads a bunch of followers of the organic grassroots populist MAGA right over the cliff edge, chasing this obscene idea that Mossad or Israel or some element of the Israel First MAGA Zionist cause was behind Charlie Kirk's assassination, by putting so much stake into that when it clearly was not the case, and it's going to be dispositively disproven that that is going to undercut the anti-Semitic rights position and make it easier for the MAGA Zionists to consolidate control of the right in general and the future of Turning Point USA in particular. That is also evaporating in real time with AmFest taking place. Ben Shapiro effectively bought his way into an AmFest slot. He wasn't invited, but he made a donation, or had a donation made effectively on his behalf in the low seven figures range, allegedly, that he was permitted to speak at AmFest. That is, after all, how the institutionally prestigious and wealthy MAGA elite insurgency often gets its way, is by spreading money around. Well, after Shapiro did his war on anti-Semitism thing, attacking Candace Owens and dismissing any questions about the narrative of the lone shooter, trans leftist, taking out Charlie Kirk. After he did that, he was really, this is spectacular and it's still ongoing as we record here, he was followed by person after person attacking him, going after Ben Shapiro, most notably Tucker Carlson, who spoke immediately after Ben Shapiro, but also even people who have been quite skeptical of Candace Owens, like Jack Posobiec and Megyn Kelly, also going after Ben Shapiro, and then most unrestrained and direct up to this point, really going for the jugular of Ben Shapiro, at least up to this point, because again, there are still more people who could, on this bandwagoning piling on against Ben Shapiro, was Steve Bannon, who said the following in his AmFest address on the same stage that Ben Shapiro had just several hours before spoken to the same AmFest crowd and to grassroots conservatives, Turning Point USA supporters across the country and across the world.
Shapiro is like a cancer, and that cancer spreads. It's a cancer, and it metastasizes. He tried to take over Breitbart, and I ran him out of there. He tried to take over David Horowitz's, who was his mentor. Don't ask me. Ask the guys associated with David Horowitz what he did there. He tried to take that over. And mark my word, he will make a move on Turning Point because he's always been envious of Charlie Kirk.
Instead of leveraging Owens' putative, baseless, clownish accusations about conspiracies surrounding Charlie Kirk's death, instead of that being leveraged by the MAGA forces as they retcon Charlie Kirk's apprehensions about the direction that Israel-focused conservatism was taking the American right, instead of leveraging that against hostility towards Zionism and the MAGA movement, it's increasingly looking like the energy that has grown around Candace Owens' dogged focus on questions surrounding the assassination is being leveraged by MAGA forces to strike back against the MAGA institutional money that is trying to take over Turning Point USA. It is pretty remarkable to have so many major figures on the populist right attacking Ben Shapiro in the way that they are here so publicly on a stage, in a way that is especially humiliating to him because he just spoke before that, where he referred to Megyn Kelly in particular as a friend, to then be criticized so openly on the same stage by, again, the biggest names, the most influential people, or many of the most influential people. Of course, Tucker Carlson is the single most influential, maybe after Candace Owens. Those two are the one and two in terms of the most influential people on the populist right now. For them to be coming after Ben Shapiro in such a high-profile way signals that if it is institutional donor support that is how Turning Point USA's bread is buttered in the future, it is going to lose virtually all of its popular support, and it will no longer be the cultural force that Charlie Kirk made it, and instead it really will be indistinguishable from the Liberty Institute or the Heritage Foundation or these other think tanks that have a lot of donor money and are referenced in corporate media, but who have no effective influence in popular discourse at all. Also from the meeting, Candace Owens said that Erika Kirk allegedly is concerned about the information that she found about these Egyptian registered planes, and that Erika Kirk had to turn the information over to authorities and was awaiting some sort of explanation as to what was going on with them. Owens says that she is in the process of making the data publicly available. There has been a report by someone highlighted by Alex Jones that Jeff made me aware of, who purchased access to the same flight log data that Candace Owens Candace Owens used to come to the conclusion that there was an overlap in travel between Erika Kirk's location and these planes 67 times over the last few years, and that his use of the data showed that in 66% of the cases, Owens was interpreting the data incorrectly. I think that's what I gathered from it. In 66% of the cases, her assertions were incorrect. Without having access to the primary data and the ability to sift through it, that assertion strikes me as plausible. As someone who has spent a lot of time digging through somewhat obscure but publicly available information and trying to present it in an accessible way to a consuming public at obviously an infinitesimally smaller scale, that there are a lot of intricacies and inadvertent misreadings of the details of the data that can occur. And it requires a meticulous patience and tolerance for the mundane technical readings of how the data was gathered and what exactly it's saying and what the p-values are and the betas and the statistical significance and the sample size, that if it's not something a person is familiar with doing and it is additionally via a medium someone is not familiar with and it's data that someone hasn't contended with previously, that there could be errors. And there was already, to Candace Owens' own admission, an instance where she got a couple hours off on a plane's landing or takeoff schedule because of time zone concerns. And that's another element when you're talking about tracking travel logs on a global scale. The time zone considerations alone are going to present a lot of potential problems. But the takeaway here is that I don't think that this conclusion really says what it is being reported as having said. And admittedly, I don't have a great frame of reference for how many overlaps in travel would be expected by any plane randomly taken from the global population or even the American airspace population over the same period of time. If Candace Owens' conclusion, which is reported on as being errant, if that is to be believed, then it was about a 1 in a trillion chance that there could have been 67 overlaps over the last couple of years. Well, if instead it was 66% of those were incorrect, only 34% of those were correct, well, 34% of 67 is 23. And so if there is an Egyptian registered plane that has landed many times in Israel, that has totally innocuously overlapped with the travel of an American citizen living in a different hemisphere 23 times over the last couple of years, well, that goes from maybe a 1 in a trillion chance to a, say, 1 in 10,000 chance. And when you're looking at a p-value of 0.001 instead of 0.0000000000001, well, that still statistically suggests that there is, in fact, a there. While Erika Kirk asserts that she is going back to work and hasn't said anything else about Candace Owens one way or the other, Candace Owens also continues to do her Charlie Kirk killing investigation work, and the biggest revelation this week is that the reason that the gun took as long as it took to find is that the bomb dogs and the canine units that first swept the area didn't turn anything up, and it was only after federal investigators arrived. And that is another, to go on a little bit of a tangent, that's another thing that is a bit of a question as to why the FBI is involved in murder investigation so immediately after it happened. The innocuous explanation is that this is just so high profile that the federal government is going to be involved. But in general, the FBI doesn't investigate homicides. In retrospect, given that this was, as reported, given the Robinson as lone shooter narrative, this would be classifiable as an instance of political terrorism, and so that makes sense for the FBI to be involved. But that seems like that conclusion was made with lightning rapidity, given that just hours after local investigators were on the scene, the FBI was on the scene as well. And it was only once the FBI arrived that the firearm was found, after the local bomb dogs and canine unit couldn't find any firearm, then with some direction from the FBI, police officers just walking over to the area, found the rifle that allegedly had Tyler Robinson's DNA on it, found it abandoned. And so it quite literally is the non-smoking gun. Because if the weapon had been fired in an hour or two following the shooting, well, the local police dogs would have detected it. These dogs are still used in the current year because their olfactory sense is still superior to any other sort of technology developed for detecting explosives and gunpowder residue than any other technologies available. And in the wake of this revelation, there are countless assertions all over social media from people claiming to have some familiarity with canine detection of firearms and explosives, that this is literally incredible, such that it can't possibly be accurate if the weapon in question was actually the one that was used to take out Charlie Kirk. And so understanding my own mental modules and the initial gut instincts I had about this case that Jeff and I discussed a couple of months ago, where I posited what seemed to me a plausible situation where Tyler Robinson is involved in some sort of activity speculated on as being at the time connected in some way to an Antifa type of network where several people are involved and several people do specific things, but no one is involved in the entire operation or knows all of the relevant details surrounding it, that Tyler Robinson, to play his part, it might have been sold to him that, hey, you're going to take this weapon and put it at this specific place at this specific time. And this was before I had listened to Candace Owens and all gone down that rabbit hole or series of rabbit holes. But I can't help but notice that that would be entirely internally consistent with what is being reported here, which is that, yes, the firearm had Tyler Robinson's fingerprints on it, and so, yes, he was the one who placed it here, but he wasn't the one who actually fired the weapon and committed the crime, and that would be, of course, the way that he would be able to be roped into this conspiracy, is not knowing exactly what's going on and just being told, hey, take this thing to this place and set it there. You want to do something for this cause, this is how you can do something for this cause, but don't worry, you're not doing anything illegal. And whatever happens afterwards, just keep mum, keep tight-lipped about it. Don't worry, nobody can prove anything. You didn't hurt anybody. You just took a legally owned firearm and placed it in a certain location. I thought I had this week too that I should have had previously to help potentially fill in why Tyler Robinson would have done what he had done. Well, the weird case of George Zinn, this is the old guy who was in the crowd who, after Kirk was killed, immediately stood up and started taking credit for the assassination, and who was detained, and later it was reported that he had possession of child pornography on his phone, that he said when he was being booked that he was paid to do what it was that he did. It's difficult to nail down definitively from news reports, but it looks like, reading up on it, that it was not the FBI that reported the child pornography, the content on George Zinn's phone, but that it was the Utah County Sheriff's Office that discovered as much, whether it be via Zinn's unforced confession, or if they were able to get into his phone, or if they just asked him for access and he provided it and they were able to discover it. Well, if Zinn is in any way part of a network that include Tyler Robinson and this Lance Twiggs fellow who has fallen off the radar entirely, who is not making any statements, and though he's not seemingly implicated in anything, hasn't said anything, at least publicly, there seems to be no corporate media interest in following up with him. But just with those three cast of characters, the idea that there wouldn't also be Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs and this Trans-Tifa network is highly dubious. And CP is mercifully still a taboo. It is really the last great taboo, at least the last social taboo on non-salubrious behavior. There are plenty of taboos on doing things that are good for people and good for society and good for personal development. But in terms of things that are self-destructive, that are self-destructive and predatory, that are still overwhelmingly, really without hardly any exceptions, condemned by society, including most of the avant-garde, at least in terms of how they publicly face, it is child pornography and child sexual abuse, such that even in prisons, going in with any sort of predation on children is known to effectively be a death sentence if provided access to the general felon population. And so if the FBI or some other intelligence agency were running an operation similar to what was attempted in Michigan with the governor there, if there is some sort of alphabet agencies behind this or involved in this, then a network like one that would include people like Lance Twiggs and Tyler Robinson and George Zinn, that would be a network of people with the right confluence of ideology and compromising personal behaviors that would allow them to be marshaled as role players in an assassination. And what would be the purpose of putting together, prodding such an operation, green flagging it, if not it being an entire false flag, then green flagging it, or potentially even just using these as decoys to remove Charlie Kirk and commandeer his operation, Turning Point USA, while simultaneously uniting the right, the MAGA Zionist institutional right, with the MAGA populist grassroots. Well, that is exactly what happened in the immediate aftermath of the Kirk killing. The memorial service brought figures from all over the right, both the MAGA populist types like Tucker Carlson, the administration itself, and countless other MAGA donor types, all together in this massive outpouring of support and fundraising. And the Israeli government injected itself. Netanyahu himself talked about how great a friend Charlie Kirk was. And so it looked like you had this energy that was behind what had happened to Charlie Kirk that was going to be able to get the populist right on board. After all, this was a Antifa terrorist murdering in cold blood someone whose MO was free speech and debate in public. And in the days and weeks subsequent to Kirk's killing, his show continued, and it was guest host by the same sort of broad catalog of figures who spoke at the memorial. And so it looked like this was going to serve that purpose, or rather at least have that effect, whether or not there was intention behind it, or if it was just an opportunity that was opportunistically seized by the MAGA forces. It did look like initially that it was going to play out entirely to their benefit, and it would be ahead of the continued Israeli pressure on Gaza and the West Bank and Iran, and also the neocon supported lead up to the seeming impending attack on Venezuela. Now that is faltering a little bit, but it's faltering in concert with the Trump administration faltering, with an enormous amount of internecine fighting taking place on the right at the popular level and at the political level. This attack of Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson and Jack Posobiec and Megyn Kelly on Ben Shapiro is in many ways echoed in the political realm with Donald Trump going on the warpath against Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and them rallying a lot of grassroots support pushing back against the Trump administration. And so far from creating a unified, reinvigorated MAGA reunified front led by the MAGA concerns at the expense of MAGA, and instead just using MAGA's trappings as a sort of skin suit, of which Charlie Kirk is the macabre illustration of that, trying to retcon the direction he was going and using his institution to undercut the MAGA concerns that were weighing heavier on him all the time. Instead of that happening, as it looked like it was going to, this push that Candace Owens has made and has taken the bulk of the young popular energy on the right that has rallied to her and has become only more and more increasingly skeptical of the MAGA attempted takeover of Turning Point USA. That can, for better or worse, be laid primarily at the feet of Candace Owens for doing what it is that she's doing, what she has been doing over the last 3 months. Tangentially, it's rich to see the same forces on the institutional right critical of the questions that Candace Owens has raised, now raising questions of their own surrounding the Brown University killing of the vice president of the college Republicans, and discrepancies with the way that the incident is being reported officially and how facts on the ground and the digital forensics that are now a part of everything that happens where a crime occurs and those involved, both perpetrators and victims, have effectively, to varying degrees, an open book about their lives, about their cultural beliefs, about the politics that they were involved in, the activities that they were involved in. So much of personal life and professional life is now accessible to anyone who wants to look for it. And when it comes to bad people doing bad things, that is a very good thing. Potential motivations, and networks that could potentially be implicated, those are much more accessible by the public than they were in the past. And though I have nothing to add about the Brown University killing, I can't imagine my sentiment being stop questioning that, stop looking at things, stop spinning the stories, stop sowing potential confusion. It's a weird orientation to have, especially from a heritage American member of the dissident right. And I can't help but contrast that to the instincts that so many of those putatively in that same general grouping have towards questions surrounding Charlie Kirk's killing. And to further emphasize that point, I will reclinate back to the assessment of Erika Kirk's inauthenticity, publicly facing inauthenticity anyway, in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder, and how it relates to the seeming selective outrage about questions about the Kirk killing with the burgeoning questions about the Brown University killing. That sort of selective outrage often has a deeper subconscious purpose and always has a more immediate pragmatic purpose. And I think we can find parallels between how gracious and forgiving and non-militant Erika Kirk's words were for presumably Tyler Robinson at Charlie Kirk's memorial, with how antagonistic and acrimonious she was when talking about Candace Owens to Barry Weiss. And there is a similar dynamic we see regularly at work when it comes to instances of heinous interracial violence, apropos of the reality taboo and the coverage of the Austin Metcalf killing, where, to briefly jog your memory, in Texas at a track event, a black student stabbed to death an unarmed white student over allegedly being called out for being in the incorrect location, that the father of the slain student was all kumbaya, extending group hugs and understanding and the de-escalation of tensions when it came to the alleged perpetrator of that heinous murder, but had much harsher, more animated, more visceral, pugilistic words for advocates of his slain son, of the interests of his slain son, pointing out the racial dynamics of the incident and how they fit with a broader pattern that is seen repeating again and again and again. And though the empirical data is not as clear with regards to high-profile political assassinations and how there are a bunch of alphabet agency, deep state managerial connections that always seem to crop up in all of these assassinations over time, that is not as firmly established as the differential rates in violent criminal activity, I cannot dismiss the sense that the very stark differences in tone and orientation in both cases share a nefariously similar purpose. That'll do it for us this week. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.